the time for playing is over. It's been over, but it's really
Well,
over.
let's not be dramatic here.
Oh, gosh.
Do we all know what we've got ourselves into?
Welcome to the Great Reset.
Do we know where we're likely to be going? And who is going to lead us?
Thanks, Sinazi!
It's true.
What I'm trying to say is Ted Kaczynski was right.
That's what all the people say. I took Poland in April, then France in May.
Zu Arafat. Und als die Redezeit von Shimon Peres abgelaufen war,
And you know, I was starting to crumb. Then I took those checks in June. I see Third Reich.
I met Lenin in 1920 when I was in Russia. I had an hour's talk tete-a-tete with him. And I was less impressed by Lenin than I expected to be. He was, of course, a great man. He seemed to me a reincarnation of Cromwell, with exactly the same limitations that Cromwell had. Absolute orthodoxy. He thought a proposition could be proved by quoting a text in Marx. And he was quite incapable of supposing that there could be anything in Marx that wasn't right. And that struck me as rather limited. I disliked one other thing about him, which was his great readiness to stir up hatred. I put certain questions to him to see what his answer would be, and one of them was, you profess to be establishing socialism, but as far as the countryside is concerned, you seem to me to be establishing peasant proprietorship, which is a very different thing from agricultural socialism. And he said, oh, dear me, no, we're not establishing peasant proprietorship. He said, you see, there are poor peasants and rich peasants, and we stirred up the poor peasants against the rich peasants, and they soon hanged them to the nearest tree. Ha, 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 ha. I didn't much like that.
I will help save the world first, then take over the world. I will help save the world first, then take over the world.
So, what does the Gutenberg Press, World War I, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine all have in common?
Primarily, the World Economic Forum, which is the Mordor to our Shire.
Do monarchies still matter in Britain?
Did you see what the United States just said about China?
The US has blasted China for its provocative and destabilizing military activity near Taiwan. The UN's Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, met his Chinese counterpart, Wei Fenghe, on Friday. The meeting was held in Singapore on the sidelines of the crucial Shangri-La dialogue. In a stark warning to Washington, Beijing said that if anyone dares to split Taiwan from China, the Chinese army will definitely not hesitate to start a war, no matter the cost. The two sides had reiterated that they want to better manage their relationship. However, there has been no reason or sign of any kind of breakthrough in resolving differences. In fact, Austin pointed out that there had been an alarming increase in the number of unsafe and unprofessional encounters.
It has made it more clear than ever before that these organizations are not performing the function with which they were once called into being. They have proven to be useless in every respect. If you look at the UN, it was intended to create world peace, and it made no attempt to stop war. The World Trade Organization, meant to promote trade, failed to protect that world trade, and we're now seeing massive shortages of food and goods. The European Court of Human Rights utterly failed to protect human rights when governments across Europe were imposing measures inspired by the Chinese Communist Party on their citizens. And let's face it, the World Health Organization encouraged lockdowns, which have proven to be more damaging to human health than a COVID virus could ever be. So in short, they have proven to be useless.
As it's unfolding more or less in plain sight, right before our very eyes. Analysis from Forbes magazine, quote, while MSV, maximization of shareholder value, delivered a gargantuan transfer of assets to the existing owners of shares, it didn't deliver for the rest of society. The best analysts could see that MSV was a toxic mix of soaring short-term corporate profits, astronomical executive pay that led to stagnant median incomes, growing inequality, periodic massive financial crashes, declining corporate life expectancy, slowing productivity, declining rates of return on assets, and overall, a widening distrust in business.
And as funny as it may seem, lift the music up. I just got mine cakes, watching nations scream. But I won't let it get me down. 'Cause it would soon be my world, spinning around.
So, what does the Gutenberg Press, World War I, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine all have in common? And they're all incidents that completely changed the world. The printing press made Martin Luther a superstar and then sparked off a series of religious conflicts. The 30 Years' War is one of them, but it wasn't the only one, that devastated Central Europe and changed the map of Europe that had been, well, it had been constant for about 1,000 years really before that. And then there's World War I, of course, which toppled the long-established European monarchies and aristocratic systems and laid the groundwork for the devastation that was communism all the way round the world. And so you can say, well, these were all huge events, massive wars, people were involved throughout the known world in most of these things. But in what way is the Ukraine conflict related to them? It's, after all, it's basically, it's a little battle on the eastern borders of a country that most of us couldn't even have found on a map last January. And great big Russia, which should have steamrolled over them in about 5 minutes, like it did over Czechoslovakia in 67, 68, anyway, something like that. But my theory is that this is probably one of the most devastating, it's certainly the most devastating thing that's happened in this century.
I will help save the world first, then take over the world.
70 years of the world's longest reign. It's a very different United Kingdom from the one where Queen Elizabeth first saw the light of day in 1066, and where royal heads have rolled in the past, the state paying its respects to Elizabeth Regina, a nod to neighbors whose fate will always be intertwined, or perhaps a farewell to a soon bygone era.
And I'm not joking, and it's literally led by a man called Sauron, or at least he just dresses like Sauron. His name's Klaus Schwab, and we'll talk about him in a minute. But this really is the final boss of the globalist project and one of the prime movers behind it. So I thought it might be worth talking about their vast reach, their vast finances, and who it is they've got in charge and what it is they think.
Now, the idea of stakeholder capitalism might sound incredibly appealing given the devastating results stemming from corporate commitment to maximizing shareholder value over the last half century. So to sum it up, capitalism is badly in need of a PR overhaul, and Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum is equal to the task.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster for Russia. My guess is he will move in. He has to do something.
Ukrainian officials reacted with shock with what President Biden said when he talked about a minor incursion might be a different situation.
Yeah, that's a critical point, isn't it? I'm always struck by the complacency of US media coverage on some of these bigger questions. And I was interested to see that when, for example, Russia and India decide to do a big energy deal in rubles, and then when Moscow tries to impose a ruble deal on Germany and other EU members, The word in Washington and on Wall Street is, oh, don't worry about this. Don't make a big deal about this. It's nothing to worry about. It strikes me as significant.
Breaking news out of Geneva, today's historic summit between President Biden and Russia's Vladimir Putin. And there is a live picture coming into our newsroom right now. The Swiss president, who is hosting the meeting at a villa in Geneva, introducing the two presidents. This is the moment the world has been waiting for, to see these two leaders side by side. And in a moment, they will be face to face across a conference table at that villa in Geneva. This is a moment of extremely high tension. Both leaders saying the U.S.-Russian relationship is at a low point.
Putin has the gall to say he's denazifying Ukraine. Your family budget, your ability to fill up your tank, none of it should hinge on whether a dictator declares war and commits genocide a half a world away. For free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principles, hope and light.
And the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, too. Anyway.
To satisfy a craving for absolute power and control. It's nothing less than a direct challenge to the rule-based international order established since the end of World War II.
Russia wants guarantees that Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO. Ukraine estimates that Russia has assembled more than 90,000 troops near its borders and in annexed Crimea. The US and other countries fear a repeat of Russia's actions in 2014 when it seized Crimea from Ukraine. Russia has been supporting separatists in areas of eastern Ukraine, highlighted here in pink and light red. This was Vladimir Putin arriving in Crimea back then after its annexation by Moscow. In response, the West placed economic sanctions on Russia, and it was booted out of the G8 group.
But our trade deficits have never been bigger, and so we've never been more dependent on the dollar's reserve status, and so we've never had more at risk if that status is lost. And, interestingly enough, and not that many people talk about this, but the Russian ruble is actually higher now against the dollar than it was before the invasion. I mean, there was an initial plunge where the ruble was down almost 40%, but it's now up about 4% since the invasion. Now, the ruble is still quite a bit lower than it was a year ago, but it's interesting that it's rallied, off those lows and is now higher than it was pre-invasion. I remember when Biden was bragging about how much value the ruble had lost. And I was saying to myself, well, imagine how much value the dollar is going to lose as a result of what we're helping to push Russia and the rest of the world into as we push them away from the U.S. dollar.
We have a bilateral relationship that has deteriorated to its lowest point in recent years.
The Russian leader last met with an American president in Helsinki in 2018.
It's great to be with you.
So how does he compare former President Trump with the fifth American president he's now set to meet? He told us Biden is someone he can work with.
And some like it, some don't like it, but that is a fact. President Biden, of course, is radically different from Trump because President Biden is a career man. He has spent virtually his entire adulthood in politics. Just think of the number of years he spent in the Senate. A different kind of person. And it is my great hope that, yes, there are some advantages, some disadvantages, but there will not be any impulse-based movements on behalf of the sitting U.S. president.
We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principles, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
And a real signal, pubs are closing late. They'll be open till 1 a.m. so that the country can party on into the night with the liquids that they wish to ingest.
We have the means to improve the state of the world.
But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people.
I
I asked him about whether or not Putin wanted to have a Cold War resumption, and he answered by saying, well, I don't think that he wants to go back into a full-scale war, and then proceeded to describe where Putin was sort of jammed in between the West and China. And in some ways, he almost described Putin as a somewhat weak figure who's making quick tactical decisions rather than big strategic ones.
The last thing that this White House wants is the image that people have to clean up after this president.
We have the means to improve the states of the world. But two conditions are necessary. The first one is that we act all as stakeholders of larger communities, that we serve not our only self-interests, but we serve the community. That's what we call stakeholder responsibility. And second, that we collaborate. This is the reason why you find many opportunities here during the meeting to engage into very action and impact-oriented initiatives.
That was a clip of Klaus Schwab's opening remarks at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos just a couple weeks ago. Once again, laying out publicly his stakeholder capitalist agenda for everyone to see.
You know how some kids think that milk originates in supermarket refrigerators and bread grows on shelves and eggs just appear in these little boxes? Well, that's how most people have thought of food up until now, and I'm talking principally of one of the most important aspects of the food we eat, and that's grain, usually wheat. We're going to be thinking of that a lot harder from now on. Bread doesn't grow on shelves. It grows in fields, and most of those fields are in the wide open spaces of Central Europe. And the MENA countries are all dependent, to a greater or lesser extent, on Ukrainian and Russian wheat. And normally it comes from the coasts of both of these countries, across the Black Sea, into the Mediterranean, and then straight into the countries that have ordered the consignments. It's simple up until now. And Libya and Egypt get something like 80% of their grain requirements from Ukraine and Russia, and have been getting it that way, well, for years. So if this Ukraine war drags on into a sort of World War I trench warfare where the Russians have stopped the Ukrainians from exporting their grain through the Black Sea, and the Russians can't export their grain across the Black Sea because various countries have blockaded them, Ukraine is still going to be producing the wheat, but they won't be able to get it through the Black Sea and then through the Mediterranean. So the logical solution to that is they'll truck or train it through Europe, and then it'll have to come all the way around the coast of Europe, through the Straits of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean to deliver to the countries in the MENA area. Mainland Europe is going to suffer. If this, as I say, if this drags on, winter comes and the fuel supplies are restricted. But it's not just that, because oil and gas, or at least oil, they run the air conditioning in places like Italy and Spain. And that's also important. So there's going to be a whole lot of social disruption, as I say, probably a lot of refugees as well. And I believe if this war carries on, we really are going to be into a new world order, and possibly not one we could have predicted.
You now have all the truths, the real truth.
Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength.
What I'm trying to say is Ted Kaczynski was right.
The essential point that I want to make in all of this is that we, I think, are genuinely at a point of rupture in international relations.
Suggest otherwise would be Islamophobic.
Exactly. So somebody who exhibits this type of behavior is exhibiting ostrich logic.
Social credit deducted.
And those that don't toe the line, they would lose their rights and privileges. Look at the data.
And boy, has it ruffled some feathers to dive into a complex societal issue.